Hello, scrufftards, degenerates, and basement dwellers. Welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy, and this is Scruffy Tales. And I'm back at home with my regular computer, and so why not make a map update going over stuff that has happened along the entire front line from Tetkino all the way down to Zaporizhia. We can see that Ukraine is kicking ass in SUMY Oblast, but Russia has some crucial successes along the front line as well, causing some issues north of Kupyansk and at Pokrovsk. They have made a very significant move. And we're back, so we're gonna take a look at Andrew's map, we're gonna take a look at Mayakovsk 73's map, and we're gonna take a look at Deep State and what have you, and check things out along the front line. And we're starting off with SUMY Oblast and Tetkino. We're zooming in on Tetkino because I think this here is important, where we have contested territory on the Ukrainian side of the border at Besalivka. We're seeing this on Andrew's map, on the ISW map, but not Mayakovsk 73 and not on Deep State. Andrew and Mayakovsk also don't have like the official Ukrainian map locations in Kursk, and that is down here, and Deep State also has Ukraine controlling territory all the way over here. So combining the various maps, I think the situation in Tetkino looks a bit like this, where we have Ukraine has pushed in along this road here. We know Ukraine has been bombing Russians in this part of town. We also know that this factory here is contested, and that means Ukraine can move up to it. These bridges were bombed to hell and back during the initial Kursk incursion, so I don't think Ukraine is relying on those to get across. So I'm thinking they can move along this street through this forest somehow in order to contest the factory. And we see Ukraine dropping airstrikes on this part of town, mainly around this building here and the surrounding buildings. It used to be that Ukraine bombed the factory every now and then for a year, especially during the Kursk incursion. Now they're bombing over here, and the maps have the factory as contested. So Ukraine more than likely has a presence since they have moved the artillery and the airstrikes away from their factory. So that means they can move through these woods to reach the factory. And we also know that they have bombed Russians down here between this part of town and this part of town. Now, this is where it gets interesting. At Besalivka, apparently Russia has made a push, which suggests that they have come through this windbreak here and potentially down this way as well in order to reach Besalivka, right? So it's not unthinkable that Russia has made a push down through Saria out of Wolfinsky to reach Besalivka. And that makes sense. This is where Ukraine can move troops and equipment up in through cover all the way up to the border, and then continue through cover into Russia. So if Russia holds Besalivka, Ukraine must move through open spaces to reach their positions elsewhere. So it makes sense for Russia to take Besalivka, if that is indeed the case, or at least contest it, to deny Ukraine to move through cover all the way up to the border and further into Russia proper. Andrew Perpetua has this entire area here as contested for the Ukrainians. Unclear if that is the case. I think Andrew is the only one showing that. So it's a big question mark. This is what the official Ukrainian map of the Kursk area looks like, with Ukraine having secured this part. We're not seeing that on the other mappers, but this is the official Ukrainian map that tells us that Ukraine has pushed in here. Kind of makes sense, right on the border, move in, secure this valley with all the trees and what have you. And then you have Ukrainians over here securing these woods into Novy Put. We knew this is where they made that trial run for their motorbike assaults. And then we can see on Deep State that Ukraine is contesting this area along with this territory here as well, if I'm not mistaken. So this is more or less a pretty accurate interpretation of the situation in Tetkino, the Tetkino area, Glushkovo Rayon, where we have Ukrainians pushing in, and based on what Russians are saying. Russians are saying that the main road leading into Tetkino is almost cut off, and that indicates that Ukraine might have pushed up here, maybe pushed up here. This is where we've seen Ukrainians operate with vehicles before, for instance. Crucially, Ukraine has bombed the bridge. Where is that bridge? This bridge. Where did it go? Right here. This bridge was bombed by Ukraine a couple of days ago, or a week or so ago. And that kind of narrows it that there are other crossing points across this creek, but this is the main road, as you can see, and Ukraine's bombed it, making it difficult for Russia to supply troops in here, forcing Russia to rely on drones to bring in support to the area. Moving on to SUMY Oblast, where the Russians have, well, they're not advancing at all whatsoever. This is interesting. Russian drone attack in the inside of Kursk. I'll return to this part in a moment. Where the main talking point is, of course, Kindrativka. Andrew Perpetua has Ukraine controlling the entirety of the town, but at the same time we can see Ukrainian drone strikes. They may be older drone strikes, maybe from a day or two ago, and then, he's just added them. But we can see Ukrainian drone strikes all over the town. So why the town is entirely occupied, I'm not sure. Russian airstrikes surrounding the town to deny Ukraine a chance to move in reinforcements, of course. If we take a look at Mayakovsk 73, we can see that he too has Russian airstrikes all over the place to deny Ukraine a chance to move in reinforcements. But half of the town is Ukrainian and half is contested. And we know Ukraine has pushed through these valleys and pushed through the northern parts of town to reach this part of town where Russia bombed Ukrainian locations with airstrikes some days ago. So what does my map look like over here? It's kind of like a mix of Andrews and Mayakovsk and what have you. And it's sort of like this. Kindrativka, where we have Ukraine. We know they pushed in north of town. We know they pushed in south. They've made attempts to push up here. Unknown how successful those attempts were. But they have pushed in, and according to Russian sources, Russian mill bloggers, there is a Russian presence in Kindrativka, but they're cut off. And they are forced to resupply those troops with drones. So they're sending in drones to resupply the troops in Kindrativka with ammunition and food and what have you. So I'm thinking either Ukraine has pushed in and secures this part of town where they got bombed, and that means they are completely isolated, or if we zoom in, Russia doesn't have that any good options for logistics. There's this lake, no roads, wide open farmland surrounding it. So for Russia to come in this way with vehicles and then try and reach safety, it's really difficult. Drones will hunt them down all along the lake, even if they try and come across the valley here, open farmland. It's difficult to support troops in Kindrativka with vehicles. So I think the fact that Ukraine is up here and over here, Russia doesn't have any options of bringing in supplies via traditional means. So they have to fly them in with drones to support Kindrativka. And then you can't bring in, volumes, and it might be difficult to support them fully for a longer period of time. So I think since the situation is so dire for the Russians here in Kindrativka, Ukraine will apply a lot of pressure to eventually overcome Russian positions and force them out. Feels reasonable. Russia has made some pushes in and around Andrivka in the north, but Ukraine has pushed back according to the latest from the mappers. And we also have Ukraine pushing in on Oleksivka, beginning to apply pressure to the southern parts of town, according to Mayakovsk 73. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same in the area. Kindrativka is the big talking point. Moving over to what's going on over here. According to the official Ukrainian map, this part is under Ukrainian control. This is not under Russian control, which isn't all that surprising if we take a look at this, where you all of a sudden have a Russian drone attack within Kursk again. So Ukraine could be operating in maybe even in the forest here and holding the border, as it were. So I'm inclined to believe the official map in this case, that Russia is not in control of this patch of woods, that all of this is under Ukrainian control, like we're seeing on my map here. So yeah, that is SUMY Oblast and Tetkino, and yeah, I think Ukraine will liberate Kindrativka eventually, and then this lake here, can they push in? Difficult to say. It's not much territory to maneuver through. Kind of easily defended, but also easily targeted by artillery and drones. But wouldn't that be something if Ukraine managed to push along this lake and reached the border once more? Wouldn't that be a propaganda win, pushing Russia back to the border in SUMY Oblast? Also, if they did that, if they can't push along this lake, take a look, then they come in north of Andrivka and are able to cut off Russian forces in these parts of the battlefield, which would, also allow Ukraine to push up and expand territory. Russian mill bloggers have also mentioned it. I should say that Ukraine were pushing heavily north out of Andrivka in order to threaten Oleksivka. We'll see if that, if any of the mappers confirm that at some point. But I think that is SUMY and Tetkino. So we're gonna move on. So we're done with this part of the battlefield, or the front line. We're now going to move down to Kupyansk and north of Kupyansk. Zooming in, we can see how Russia has, in the last couple of days, expanded territory out of Milove, pushing in this way. And now launching shelling against this windbreak here, indicating that they might try and push south as well. But they have taken some more ground, pushing towards Katnia. So is this a diversion or not? Whatever the case, this will force Ukraine to allocate troops from Vovchansk, from Kupyansk, and that will potentially make it less difficult for Russia to advance on Kupyansk, at least. Might be the main purpose here at the moment. So Russia is pushing out of Milove, and I mean, if they're successful, it will have implications. If they manage to, say, push out there, as you can see here, if we zoom in, there are a number of towns and roads that they can utilize. And if they manage to push out towards here, where you have a hub and where you have road networks connecting everything, like I pointed out in another video, here they can try and push south to Kupyansk, link up with forces here, and then you have a pocket that you can close and destroy. Same thing if you come up north towards Vovchansk, putting pressure on Vovchansk from the rear, creating a pocket that you can encircle and destroy. And of course you can also push out to the river here to further cut off the region north here between Vovchansk and this line here. So it makes sense for Russia to try and achieve this, which also will force Ukraine to allocate manpower from Vovchansk, from Kupyansk to deal with this threat. And that in turn, of course, could allow Russia to break through and reach Kupyansk, or maybe break through at Vovchansk even and continue down along the river here. So it makes sense. Might look weird that this random red blob on the map appears out of nowhere, but if Ukraine doesn't deal with it, it could have an impact on Kupyansk and Vovchansk. And yeah, damn it. And if they deal with it and allocate manpower, that too could have an impact on Kupyansk and Vovchansk. So yeah, it is an issue. Ukraine has to deal with it, and whatever happens here, this will affect the front line in this area, guaranteed. Things are happening though at Kupyansk. If we zoom in here, going back a couple of days here, we can see here massive amounts of Russian shelling in territory that is contested, indicating that Ukraine is indeed operating here, and we can see the same, I believe, on Mayakovsk 73's map. Lots of Russian shelling all over the place. Ukrainian assaults. So this area is not fully under Russian control, and this, of course, might be a reason why they haven't been able to push at Kupyansk after moving into Kindrativka. Ukraine is still operating, still causing trouble. We saw that there were some engagements here in these windbreaks south of these woods. So quite obviously Russia is still struggling with securing this territory north of Kupyansk. And like we've pointed out before, holding Kupyansk is really important because Russia is bombing a bunch of bridges across the Oskil River, leaving the bridge at Kupyansk intact. So if Russia obviously wants this bridge for their own purposes, and that means they need to push into Kupyansk and secure it. And if they do that, then this pocket has no logistics, no support, no anything, and that means Russia can push in and secure this part of the front line. Should Russia be able to secure this bridge here, you can even see all the army trucks moving along here, the logistics. But I mean, first they need to secure this part, and then they need to build up forces to be able to push into the urban areas of Kupyansk, and that in itself will be a hellish endeavor. So the Russians, they making this move, it does make a lot of sense to try and force Ukraine to move troops away from Kupyansk so that they may have a chance of pushing in to secure that bridge. Moving further south, a bit troubling to be perfectly honest. Ukraine has had a lot of success here, relatively speaking. They have been advancing for a month or two, if not more, ever so slightly, north and south of this bulge, and now of late we're seeing Russia counterattacking and pushing out over a couple of days here, increasing the contested area, mainly down here. So all of these gains might have been for nothing if Russia are successful in pushing through here to reach Novoplatonivka, for instance. See how this goes. The other day there was a report that Ukraine launched a fully unmanned assault in this area here with flying drones and ground drones, and even took Russian POWs. I don't know, true or not, I don't know, but those are the claims that Ukraine launched, sent in a bunch of drones, flying and ground drones, at some Russian positions, overcame the Russians, and Russians surrendered to the drones. If it's true, that is quite incredible, and we are seeing warfare transform before our eyes if you're using unmanned vehicles to take prisoners of war. Further south, it's basically not much is Toretsk. Not much is happening. Russia is struggling. They can't really leave Toretsk. They're having issues with this factory. I mean, the advance is a couple of 100 meters per day, basically. Not much going on over here. They're struggling with Jablanivka to push through this valley. Ukraine is holding the high ground, and that is causing a lot of trouble for the Russians. Ukraine has even secured the street here in Oleksandr Kalinoe. But the real troublesome part, it's not down here. People keep talking about this part here. This is, I mean, yeah, Russia's advancing, sure, but take a look what has happened here in the last couple of days. Going back, you're pushing up to the river, and this is on the 10th, and then we move ahead a couple of a day, and you can see that they are now securing territory, and now we push up again, and now territory is contested beyond the river. If you take a look where we have that river, by the way, so here you can see how Russia has pushed up and secured territory up to this river, and now they appear to be contesting areas to the west of this river. And that is concerning because now Russia is actually moving in north of Myrnorad and Pokrovsk to cut these vital supply lines that leads into these two cities. What I've been talking about for how long? Truth be told, I thought that this river would be more of an obstacle. It could be that Russia decided that we will not be denied and threw in everything they had and overwhelmed this part of the Ukrainian front line. Wouldn't surprise me, seeing as it is a river that is fortified, and Russia, you know, they need to come in north of Myrnorad and Pokrovsk to stand a chance of thinking of entering these cities. And here we are, they're moving in north, trying to reach Hrishine by the looks of it. So I thought, you know, I've been talking about Shakova. We've been seeing Russia directing airstrikes at this valley for weeks. That seemed to line up with my prediction of Russia heading for Shakova. But maybe the Russians figured that is the obvious choice. So aim airstrikes here, make the Ukrainians think Shakova is the objective, and then make that big push to the south to kind of throw the Ukrainians off guard and gain a foothold on the western side of the river. That might have been what's been going on. And now they're moving in towards Rodynsky here. That's not the town I was talking about before, was it? Well, they're heading for Rishine. The towns are confusing me. So they're heading clearly for Rodynsky at the moment. And if they manage this, you can see here, when we've zoomed out, there aren't that many logistical routes leading into Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. And if they can come in here and cut this main road, there's basically 2 or 3 roads that are coming down here. If we zoom in, yeah, here you can see. If Russia can push in here to Rodynsky and having pushed up to Kotlyne, Ukraine can only rely on these roads over here to supply Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. So we're nearing a point where Russia can begin thinking about pushing in properly into Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. Will it happen this year? I don't know. I'm thinking Ukraine might actually push it into 2026. To be perfectly honest, wouldn't surprise me. What we'll see if Russia does begin maneuvers to enter Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. And when that happens, like I've said before, this battle could potentially decide a war. This could become the modern day Stalingrad. And it all depends on if Russia can move around and cut these vital supplies and isolate the city, or if Ukraine can keep one supply line open and keep shipping in support to hold Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. Because if Ukraine can hold and prolong this battle, this is where they can grind down the Russians completely. We've seen the Americans come out and say that in 2025 alone, so far, Russia's lost 100,000 killed in action. In 2025 alone, so far. So, and that is just fighting out in these farmlands, where you know, the Russians, they need, say, a 5 or 6 to 1 advantage to overcome defenses. If they enter Pokrovsk and Myrnorad, they need a 10, 15, 20 to 1 advantage to overcome Ukrainian positions. This is gonna be hell on earth, and if the Russians enter Pokrovsk and Myrnorad before they're ready, prematurely, while Ukraine can still bring in supplies, Ukraine can crush the Russian army in Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. This could very well become the battlefield that ultimately decides the outcome of the war. So we're gonna have to keep an eye on that. Over here, it's interesting. Ukraine, or Russia, I should say, they are advancing. If we keep going back, remember, we've been talking about this before. Massive airstrikes to allow. They've been bombing this town. They were bombing this town for a couple of days and then pushed in. Then they started bombing over here, and that allowed them to push up. And now they're bombing this village or town even more with airstrikes, indicating that Russia wants to continue pushing up this way, probably because this is where we have cover, we have buildings, we have some woods. They want to avoid these wide open spaces, so they need to push up this way to move their troops through what little cover there is, and then maybe they can reach this urban area here, these suburbs rather. I guess they are trying to avoid these high-rise buildings that more than likely are dominating the surrounding area, these open fields. So from these high-rise buildings, I'm guessing Ukraine can destroy basically any Russian advance. So the Russians are trying to avoid these high-rise buildings coming up here. As we've been seeing, they're bombing their way through the these coastal towns to reach the suburban area over here. So that is the Zaporizhzhia front line, and that is the front line at large. Things are still happening down in Kherson, and here you can see how Ukraine is launching strikes at Holopristan, for instance. But that is the front line in general. I think Ukraine they have the advantage in SUMY. Russia walked straight into a trap. We talked about this multiple times. But this has me concerned. I thought this river would be a greater obstacle for the Russians, but it does appear. I think they actually, you know, when they aimed so many airstrikes at this valley, they made Ukraine think that Chakove was the objective, and then they made a big push towards Razhine and overcame Ukrainian defenses, crossed the river, and are now contesting the western side in order to secure territory so that they can make a push towards Rodinsk over here. And that is troublesome. If they reach Rodinsk, then they have cut this extremely vital northern logistical route that Ukraine truly relies on to keep Pokrovsk and Myrnorad alive. Just a quick return back to SUMY Oblast and Kindrativka. Again, zoom in. I readjusted my map a bit. As you can, if we zoom in, there's not much cover surrounding this lake here, as you can see. So basically, this is territory you can't hold, you can't defend. So now this kind of gives you a better view of the situation here. for the Russians in Kindrativka. They are cut off. They don't have any viable roads or pathways that leads into town to support them from areas that the Russians can control. As you can see here you have, sporadic cover in this small valley with these creeks around this lake. That is where you have all the cover. But when you come down towards Kindrativka, all of that, fades away, and it's just all these wide open spaces. So this is why the troops in Kindrativka essentially are cut off. Ukrainian drones can hunt at will in this space here, denying Russia a chance to move in support and supplies. So the Russians have to fly in those supplies with drones to support their troops in Kindrativka. And of course, it's highly likely that Ukraine will eventually liberate Kindrativka if they can keep up the pressure on this town. And that's gonna have to be it. It's so nice to actually use my regular computer again and make a proper frontline update. But yeah, key takeaways. Ukraine is in control of the narrative in SUMY Oblast. Russia is making crucial moves at Pokrovsk that may affect the future battle for Pokrovsk. And we'll see how it all ends up, how it all plays out. But with all that said, thank you for watching. And as always, go på marsch, Ukraine, and give them hell.